Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those interesting hearings where I find myself in complete agreement so far with every one of my colleagues. I will not try to repeat everything, but I do want to say that as we approach this hearing, clearly in the context of regulatory reform, many of us are looking far beyond simply the insurance industry, but to the entire financial system that we have in our country. And one of the obvious questions is whether we need to create a very broadly empowered systemic risk regulator. If we do need to create such a systemic risk regulator, would that regulator have authority over insurance for systemic risk regulation? If we do have that kind of insurance-covered systemic risk regulator with broad powers, how does that regulator coordinate with the functional or solvency regulator? And if that regulator is not just a single additional Federal regulator, how do we coordinate with the 50 states and deal with the kinds of issues that both our Chairman and Ranking Member have raised today? Those kinds of questions are important for us to answer as we move forward in the larger context of what our broad regulatory system will be for our financial institutions in this nation. And I look forward for guidance from our witnesses on that today. I just want to mention one other item very quickly. I note that at least one of our witnesses has raised the possibility that it's not likely that there is any single insurer that is too big to fail. Obviously, we thought that AIG was too big to fail, and there are now analysts who are starting to question this notion of too big to fail, whether it be in the insurance industry or in other parts of our financial system. And I'm interested in that notion. If there are institutions that are too big to fail, how do we identify that? How do we define the circumstance where a single company is so systemically significant to the rest of our financial circumstances in our economy that we must not allow it to fail? And what does fail mean? Often we're, in the context of AIG, now talking about whether we should have allowed an orderly Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceeding to proceed. Is that failure? And is that consequence something that we cannot work into our system of dealing with systemic risk and the larger questions of how the Federal Government will approach large multinational and systemically significant companies? I know that this raises a lot of almost ethereal questions that are going to be very difficult for us to answer, but the fact is that Americans are increasingly asking themselves why. Why are we going down these paths? When we first started putting resources into AIG, after the first tranche was put in, it was very commonly said by many to us here in Congress that, well, this is not just an expenditure of taxpayer dollars that's going to be lost. In fact, as we unwind AIG and as we liquidate its assets, the taxpayers are going to make a profit. Anybody here hear that? That was the first tranche. Now we've gone through number 2, number 3, and number 4. Nobody's saying that anymore. And the question that I have is, as we move into this, we need to have a better idea of what this notion of too big to fail is, what it means in different aspects of our industry, and what our proper response to it should be. Should we regulate in such a way that we don't get into situations like that? Or should we have a regulatory system that contemplates circumstances where we face companies that are too big to fail and somehow puts together a rational approach to prop them up, or, as some say, nationalize them? Now, I'm very concerned by the implications of this entire question. And I realize we aren't going to answer the question in today's hearing entirely, but I would be interested in the observations of our witnesses on this issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.